Greetings, Culture Warriors. This is Jeff Vieira, author of Culture is Everything, and your host for this latest dispatch from the front. Some more economic woes for you today. This is from Bloomberg by Manisha Jha, or J, not sure how to pronounce that. Arabica Coffee, not sure how to pronounce that either, heads for worst quarter since 2015 on demand woes. Coffee headed for the biggest quarterly loss in 5 years in New York on concern that the global health crisis is hurting demand. Arabica, or something, futures tumbled 16% since the end of March as lockdowns and a global economic slowdown hurt consumption at a time when Brazil is harvesting a record crop. Money managers are also turning increasingly bearish and are now holding their biggest net short position in more than 7 months. Arabica for September delivery rose 3.8% to $1 a pound on Monday, but is still near the lowest since October for a most active contract. Robusta coffee gained 2.3%, trimming its quarterly loss to 0.6%. The market is finding some support from a recent surge in Amazon.com Inc.'s coffee sales, showing how consumers have turned online buying, and news that Brazil has already sold 60% of its 2020 crop, according to Rabobank International. News that much of the Brazil crop is already sold and strong internet sales have been supportive for Arabica coffee, but the weakening demand and recession environment should put a lid on price upside, said Carlos Mera, an analyst at Rabobank in London. Prices may bottom once there's more clarity on how online food delivery and drive-through restaurant sales have fared, according to Toby Donovan, a trader at Group Sopex in London. The market has likely overreacted to the downside on the basis of demand destruction when, in fact, what we have seen is just a shift in demand landscape. In other soft commodities, sugar and cocoa declined in London and New York on Monday. All right, so you may be thinking to yourself, what possible cultural angle could this guy have for a story about coffee futures? Okay. And the answer is pretty simple, is that coffee consumption is actually a statement of value. And let me go back in time a little bit for you. During our 4th of July Independence Day episode, I talked a little bit about the Boston Tea Party. And it's funny because I can only imagine that students of American history in our primary schools and elementary schools, they must be confused when they hear about the Boston Tea Party because they can't understand what a big deal that really was. I mean, so what? You climb aboard a ship and dump some tea. No big deal. It seems like no big deal because since the American Revolution, America has been a nation of coffee drinkers. Coffee is grown in the New World. It's a New World product. It comes largely from South America, Central America. And so the colonials, the colonists, were Englishmen, considered themselves to be Englishmen culturally, and drank tea in all the years and decades and centuries prior to that Boston Tea Party. Tea was a very popular drink. It was a part of British culture, that tea time that the colonists maintained even despite their separation by an ocean from the mother country. And so the reason that tea was in Boston Harbor in 1775 was because there was a big market for it in the United States of America. Britain, by that point, had dominated India, and so they had a ready-to-supply to hand of Indian tea from the tea plantations over there. So they would pick up the tea for cheap. They would take it to Europe and take it to America and sell it for a very good price. When the English government decided to put a tax on that tea to drive that price up still further for something that was a real staple of the American diet, well, that created outrage. And it created such outrage that it turned a nation from a nation of tea drinkers to a nation of coffee drinkers. Now, we'd always had some amount of coffee drinking going on in the U.S. Since the beans were first brewed, but it became the drink of choice, the caffeine source of choice for Americans in the wake of that Boston Tea Party. It was a great patriotic movement to go from taking this old world product that, served to make wealthy the Britons who were lording over the United States at the time, and to instead replace it with a product that we gotten from the New World. There was a poetry to that transition that led to the empire of coffee that you see today. Now, Brazil has been especially hard hit by the coronavirus outbreaks. And so it's not surprising that the combination of effectively making it more expensive to obtain the coffee from Brazil, places like it, along with a reduction in demand for coffee, would be problematic. And apparently this gap was not entirely made up by online sales. People are drinking less coffee. You have to wonder if, as people's habits shift, you might see another transition of the sort where we go from a tea drinking nation to a coffee drinking nation to a fill in the blank here drinking nation. As the supply chains have been disrupted, as prices have been a factor, as the culture that grew up around coffee drinking. Here, we're looking at you here, Starbucks. We're looking at some of the other large coffee cafe cultures that have arisen, especially in the last 20, 30 years. Well, when you can no longer take part in that culture, when it's not possible anymore to simply go take your laptop, go to the coffee shop and work while nibbling on little treats and drinking copious amounts of coffee, when that's no longer a viable option for you, people are going to fill it in with something else. And it will be interesting to see what that something else is. Now, at the moment, there is no great political problem with, say, a Brazil or a Colombia, which would cause us to have the same repulsion towards coffee that we once had towards tea due to the conflict with Great Britain. However, we could see this play out in the form of Chinese goods. China is, of course, a major supplier of tea, but without having a lot of tea drinkers in the United States, it's hard to see that becoming problematic. But there's so many manufactured goods that are made in China that we may see a shift due to the political problems between the United States and China at the moment. We may see a shift away from the procurement of those Chinese-made goods and towards things made in other countries. India is currently seeking a boycott of Chinese goods within their country because of the dispute over a border region where the Chinese, a river had shifted. The Chinese had agreed to pull back from a position that they had that was once on one side of the river is now on the other. And instead, they've fortified that position. And it's turned into a shooting war last week. So the Indian people are seeking to boycott Chinese goods as a result. We'll see how that boycott turns out. But for the moment, there's not really we don't get coffee from China. So the situation with the Arabica beans and everything else will probably just wind up being a domestic swap, say, people drinking more soft drinks and less coffee. Something else to keep an eye out for in this very volatile market period. Have a great day.